We have a wonderful panel here today with us, practitioners, educators, classroom teachers, district administrators, and a wonderful representative of our family and our parent community to talk to you about practices, whole child practices. But since we're talking about the whole child, I thought it would be really important to get a whole child's voice into our room today.
Wherever they plant their roots, wildflowers always find ways to adapt and grow. Even if there's too much water, too little sun, or the wrong type of soil, they are beautiful, determined, and resilient. Great teachers know that each child is as exceptional and unique as a wildflower, with a destiny to grow and bloom. But how could just one teacher tend each child's unique needs? Teachers deserve more help to create the conditions where every child reaches their full potential. Whole child education cultivates a community of gardeners, teachers, parents, civic leaders, and neighbors, working together to give each child what he or she needs. And when every community rallies around each child and addresses their whole set of unique needs, the entire world will benefit from this blossoming human potential.
So that's a little bit of advertisement on the book. And I have a picture that goes along with that video. And I just want to get that up, but to finish off the story. Yeah, there she is. So that's my youngest daughter, Gabby. And what's remarkable, the voice of wildflowers. And what's remarkable about Gabby is Gabby has dyslexia. And I can tell you that Gabby was in that recording studio for over an hour, reading that script, reading it from the beginning, reading different sections, reading different paragraphs and sentences, and over. She's an inquisitive learner. She's a voracious reader. She is tough, and she is resilient, and she is determined, and she loves to be challenged. But Gabby's fortunate, because Gabby, like her dad, and like so many of us, we're wildflowers. And Gabby's fortunate that she goes to a school that embraces and relishes the whole child, where she's treated as an individual, where she has a voice and is present, where she's guided in her learning and thinking through committed educators who work together to perfect their craft, where there's a head of school and a principal that works really hard to set the conditions for those teachers and those students to be able to thrive, where parents and families and even members of the communities are authentically engaged and welcomed and are intentionally knit fabrics in the community of that learning environment. And that's what enables Gabby to thrive, and so many other students around our state and around the country. What I want to impress upon you is that whole child education isn't new, right? It's been around since the time of the progressive educators like John Dewey and Maria Montessori and Rudolf Steiner, who long before neuroscience and brain science knew how children and youth developed. They understood brain development, and they understood that it was about creating conditions for children to really thrive. Sir Ken Robinson talks about conditions, and he uses the example of a gardener when he says that gardeners don't point to a flower and a plant and say, grow. The job of the gardener is to help to create the conditions. And it's the same in education. It's the job of the adults in the system, all throughout the system, to help to create the conditions so that wildflowers can truly thrive. So I wrote this book because during our time in Sacramento, I think we did something pretty special as it came to beginning to think about what does it really mean to educate the whole child? What does it mean to have whole families and whole communities to be part of that? And I didn't want the story to be lost. I wanted to provide examples of what it looks like. Because while I know that you have to believe it before you see it, many people have to see it before they'll believe it. And I also wanted to remind people that while whole child education isn't new, to do it well, you have to change. And if you do it, it will change you. I spent the last 2 days at 2 whole child schools. They were remarkable days when you get to start your day at a school, one in Oakland and one in Sacramento. And both of those school leaders talk about creating conditions. At both of these schools, they haven't lost a teacher in 3 years because the conditions are conducive to learning. They'll be the first to tell you, this doesn't come cheap, right? But that educating children well is really sacred work. It will humble you. It will require you to be curious and ask different questions, like what does he or she mostly need? What happens when we focus on teacher wellness? These are the kinds of questions. And it will require you to be empathetic, to understand what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. So to help us understand what some of these practices are like, we have a terrific panel together today. They're going to get a chance to talk a little bit about their work. I have a few questions for them, and then I hope you have taken advantage of those index cards on your desk so that we can ask a few questions as well. So I'd like to start with Channa. Could you please give us a little bit of background on the work you're doing now?
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes, there we go. Hello. Hi. I'm Channa Cook-Harvey. I'm the Director of Social Emotional Learning at Folsom, Cordova Unified School District, formerly at Learning Policy Institute. So I'm really pleased that this report is out and all of the presenters here today from PACE. So this role is a new one for our school district. We're a mid-sized district just outside of Sacramento, straddling 2 cities, the cities of Rancho Cordova and Folsom. We've about 33 schools and about 20,000 students, 37% of which are low-income students, about 13% students learning English as a second language. And I think we have some unique opportunities and unique challenges in our district in the communities that we serve, specifically because, the city of Rancho Cordova is a very different city than the city of Folsom. For those of you that are not from the Bay Area or not from Sacramento, you'll know that there's a little bit of information about the 2 of them that make them somewhat different, right? Folsom is relatively higher income, more predominantly white. Rancho Cordova, more students of color, more students living in poverty, more students with a more range of needs, experiencing those adverse childhood experiences that Linda talked about. And so as a school district, that gives us an opportunity to really think broadly about how do we meet the needs of everybody and really personalize our learning experiences that are meeting the needs of the whole child, which is hard to do. When you look at us in aggregate, if you combine all of the test results together, we look pretty good on paper. But when you start to look a little bit more closely about those areas where we need to grow, it becomes clear that we need to spend some time thinking about how we're attending to the social emotional needs of all of our children. And that looks different in our different schools. So my role as the Director of Social Emotional Learning is really thinking about how to set the stage and design a vision and a mission that really helps us to create those conditions that Jonathan was talking about, which is a little bit outside the box. You know, I think a lot of times it's easy to be complacent and say, well, we look pretty good. We've got a pretty good graduation rate. We look pretty good on paper. But if we're not being more personalized and more specific, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So some of the things that we're doing, and I'm, just starting this role and learning about the efforts that are underway. We have a really strong emphasis on PBIS. We have our child welfare coordinator here today who spends a lot of time working on that. We're rethinking our approach to discipline and really considering ways to be more educative and restorative. And really, there's that saying that says, when kids can't read, we teach. When they don't know how to count, we teach. But when they misbehave, we punish. And that doesn't work. When you think about how in preschool education and early education, teaching students how to behave, how to interact, how to collaborate with one another, that is fundamental learning. And somehow when they get older and they're in middle school and high school, we wrongfully assume that they've already learned those things, but it's still a teaching opportunity. And so, clearly here we're really trying to figure out how to address climate, culture, connectedness. Our superintendent is just starting her second year in our district, and she has a clear vision for really emphasizing relationships in our district. And so it's really exciting to be a part of this movement, really, that is really at its genesis at this moment. And so I'm really honored to be part of figuring out how to take this research and the implications for policy at the district level and the current landscape, both in our state and federally, that allow us to think outside the box and really design schools in a different and more productive way. So.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Suzanne now.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Herko, and I'm usually a 7th grade teacher talking to 7th graders, so I apologize if I don't know my audience very well right now. I teach 7th grade humanities and learning seminar, and I'm also what we call our student agency coordinator at Gateway Public Schools. And just to give you a little bit of idea of what my schools are like, Gateway High School and Middle School, we're located in San Francisco. We've got about 55% of our students are free and reduced lunch, 75% of our students are students of color. Our mission, as part of our mission, at least 25% of our students are students with diagnosed learning disabilities. We operate with a full inclusion model. Our middle school pulls from more than 30 elementary schools in our city, and all the neighborhoods of the city also. So we have an incredibly diverse group of students, ethnically, culturally, socioeconomically, and in terms of their learning profiles. So to bring these different schools together, these different students together in a single community, I guess part of what I'm sharing with you today is how is it that we do that, and we think about what that looks like in an urban environment, teaching the whole child. And for one, we're very intentional about it. We intentionally have a very small school. We have 100 students in each grade level about in the middle school. At the high school, it's about 125. And we also, in the middle school, we teach in a cohort model. So as a humanities teacher, I also teach students what I call a learning seminar class, and I have a partner teacher who teaches the students math and science. We're also extremely explicit when it comes to overall talking about social emotional learning. So we call it student agency or process of learning, and we've actually explicated skills that we want to teach students because we see these as essential for their overall school and life success. We've divided it into 5 areas. We have academic strategies, self-awareness, growth mindset, academic habits, self-advocacy, collaboration and community skills. And these include everything from emotional awareness of self and being an upstander to developing self-awareness as a learner and being able to take risks in order to grow. And we talk about these in classes. So for example, we integrate these into all the curriculum, and we really have these student agency goals as well as content goals in all of our classes, and students actually will get evaluated on these areas. So I'll give you an example. Last week in my 7th grade learning seminar class, we were actually given the exact lesson that Linda Darling-Hammond was giving us today in one of the slides, where we were having students think about what kind of mindset they have and how we can grow our brains, how we as animals can grow our brains. And so our goal for that class was I can reflect on my own mindset and explain how the brain can grow. And this was part of our self-awareness and growth mindset skill set. That same week, students in science class were doing an egg drop experiment where they have to create a little carrier and have a raw egg, and they were going to drop it off the building, which was really fun. This happened 2 days ago. They drop it off the 3-story building. The science teacher at a school was explicitly also teaching students about risk-taking and growth mindset in the classroom. So what it looked like was she had a dry run with them, ladder inside the classroom. Students tested the model, and it dropped, and they saw what their mistakes were. And then she said, okay, now we're going to get back to work and do another design, see what we learned from that process, and we try it again. She also was very explicit in terms of how the students were supposed to be working in their group, that they couldn't just do group work, so to speak, but that she was explicitly teaching them roles with sentence starters, goal setting for themselves for a given day, and debriefs on their student work together. And so these are just some examples of how we teach explicitly student skills and then integrate them and make them part of their learning the content skills that they are tested on in the larger environment. We also have to do many common practices that we've decided as a faculty are really important, including for self-awareness and self-regulation. For example, we've decided as a school, every classroom has a peace corner and walking areas that are designated areas for students when they have self-requested breaks, like I need a walking break or I need a peace time break. We have a little signal for the peace corner, and students can go there. And at the school level, we have what we call student support office, which is home to everything from ad hoc counseling to a place to have restorative discipline circles. And that's our approach both in classroom and school-wide, is a kind of a restorative practices approach. I will also want to add, we also have an advisory, and this is a place where I think the mini community in our already small school starts. At least 4 times a week, students meet, and this is where the conventional kind of social emotional learning curriculum is nurtured. But every week we do have what we call community circles. Every advisory has that. Students start with a mindful moment. We have a question that everyone in the circle answers, and we really see this as a way that's essential for developing students' relationships with one another and nurturing the overall school community. And then the social emotional learning also includes everything from I statements to finding common ground when you need to be assertive about your interests. And then it also gives students a time to know themselves as well as each other in a positive classroom environment. I'd say, of course, like all these things, really don't work unless it's complemented by larger school efforts. And our principal and the director of our schools are essential in providing the strong leadership for our professional development on that, and cultivating the overall school climate where values, our school values of responsibility, excellence, respect, community are reinforced, with star raffles and things like that. So we really try to take that positive growth and values for students, not only in the class, but in the whole school. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Let's turn to you now, Brent.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brent Malicote. I work at the Sacramento County Office of Education. We're a county office that supports 13 districts who serve around 240,000 students in the area. So thank you for this opportunity. Really excited to be here. I want to start by saying really just blessed to be a part of an organization who really sees a whole child approach as something that is expected. It's an expectation in the work that we do, and where innovation is really encouraged. And it's because of those two things we've been able to create a social and emotional learning community of practice that I wanted to share a little bit about this morning. First, I want to say that the community of practice is anchored by California's social and emotional learning guiding principles. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at those guiding principles, I believe they came out last February with a press release from Superintendent Torlakson, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from those guiding principles, both in the community of practice as well as outside. I hope I have a chance to talk about that a little bit later as well, but it's become an anchor document for us to be able to go back and say this is something that we believe in, and we can just continue to reflect on. The response has really been pretty fantastic and a little bit overwhelming to begin with. We've only had 2 meetings to date. Our first meeting was in early May. And while we're not charging anything for this community of practice for people to come, what we found is that enrollment was completely booked into the community of practice about a month before the event happened in early May. And we had about 65 or so folks from our county and from our region that attended the community of practice. And we had folks from Sacramento County, of course. We had Lake Tahoe represented. We had Colusa County represented. We quickly realized we've got some momentum going here, and we wanted to build on that. And so we decided let's double the capacity for our second meeting, which actually happened last week on Thursday. And actually, Channa and Suzanne, they were at the meeting. So if you really want to get a true look at and taste of what was going on, you might ask them after the meeting. I think it's pretty fantastic. But if you want to really know what's going on, you might ask them their reflection. But at this past meeting, again, enrollment well before the event happened. We had 130 folks this time, and that's the biggest room that we can put together at SCOE. And I feel confident we could have doubled that in size again. And the reason that I bring this up is just to underscore what a big deal this is in California right now. This is something that people believe in. This is something that people are hungry for. They want to learn more about. And so really exciting, just the interest that's going on here. And while we had Tahoe to Colusa represented at the first meeting, we had Humboldt to San Diego represented at the second meeting. So that talks a little bit too. People are willing to travel, but I think that they'd rather have it at home, given the choice. I think some of the success, I just wanted to talk about some of the reasons that I think that this is going so well. First of all, we're really focusing on teams. We're asking that folks don't come alone. We're asking that folks come in teams from their district, from their school in some cases, from their county office. We had a team of school board members that came to the last meeting, which is, I think, really interesting as well, just the interest around what's happening with school boards in this area. But we always provide an opportunity for team planning in these meetings, and that feels like something that gives these teams an opportunity that they may not have in their busy day-to-day schedules when they're back at their school site. We didn't just have districts and schools represented, we also had county offices of education represented. Ventura, who I know Antonio is here this morning as well, Ventura sent a team. They've got a lot of great work going on in social emotional learning in their county, and they were interested in just the work that's going on with this community of practice and potentially replicating it in their county. So we had a few county offices. Fresno was another county that was represented. And then finally, we had teams from SCOE, and this was something that I didn't really, SCOE being the Sacramento County Office of Education, that I didn't really realize was going to be as big a value add as it has been. And what we've found is that we're learning from these districts and from these county offices of education that are part of this community of practice in the same way that the others are. And for example, we had a team from curriculum and instruction, we had a team from court and community schools, and what we're discovering as a county office of education, we're now becoming more aligned in our approach in the way that we're thinking about social emotional learning and bringing it to the table in all the work and all the support that we do with districts. As we're putting, another reason I think the success is going well, we've modeled this community of practice after the math and science communities of practice that some of you may be familiar with, that are funded in large part by Bechtel. Where we have a litmus test that we really are interested in making sure that the learning is the kind of learning that adults respond to and that they're interested in taking part in. And our litmus test is that, one, it's the professional learning of the group. We bring people together so that new information can be learned and shared. The second piece is that we want to provide lots of time for networking and sharing of best practices. And this is really, I think, the key to it all, that opportunity to learn from other districts in the room, from other schools in the room, both in both a formal and informal way. And then the final I mentioned before is that opportunity for team planning. And we always end the day with at least an hour and a half dedicated to consider what you've learned today and how does it fit in your own plan with your school or with your district. A couple of examples from our last community of practice meeting that happened on August 30th. One, we had a district spotlight where Visalia Unified came up, and they provided a 2-hour talk, and this was not Visalia standing at the front of the room for 2 hours, but really providing some input, some feedback, and giving teams an opportunity to consider it in their own context. But Visalia shared some important learnings. One was that they, instead of the regular day students taking on social and emotional learning and then it branching out to other parts of the school program, it was actually the expanded learning program that really started this systems approach to social and emotional learning, and it kind of backed into the regular day, which was really interesting. It was fun to hear their story. They also talked about a pilot approach to social emotional learning, where they had several schools who decided to go with a formal adopted curriculum and other schools that went with more of an embedded approach. And they're still studying that. They haven't decided that one or the other is better. I think what they're starting to discover is that maybe it's a combination of both that's really important, but it was interesting to hear them talk about that. And then finally, their struggles with how to bring data to the forefront on this, both from a school climate level and also from a student level in looking at data so that they can continually improve around social emotional learning. And then I think a final piece from our August 30th community of practice, Jacqueline Olison from the California Department of Education came and presented on adult social and emotional learning. And this has been a high interest item for many around the state. And she's been doing her doctorate study on what she calls compassion fatigue. And really an interesting take in both how adults really are important to school climate, as we all know, but she also tied it back to teacher retention, which I thought was interesting as well. Just that when you've got this fatigue around the compassion for the kids and the families you serve, how that can sometimes turn into trauma for you as well. So that's just a little bit about our community of practice. And yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brent. Yesenia?
Good morning. My name is Yesenia Ramirez. I am with the Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. I am the training director for the organization, and I'm also one of the founding parents of the organization. The Parent Teacher Home Visit is it's a nonprofit that began here in Sacramento back in 1996 with focus groups throughout Sacramento, specifically in the Meadowview area where some of our very low-income, it's a very low-income community in some of our schools. And we develop a training on how to do a different approach to our community. Our community was suffering at the time. There was a huge disconnection between the community and the school, a huge lack of communication and trust between the community and the school. And the reason that I became involved was because most importantly, I am a mother. I am a mother of 6 girls, and at the time, my oldest child was in 5th grade and was reading at a 1st grade level, and I was very, very desperate. I needed help, and I did not know how to get that help for her. I always say that for me, the language was not the barrier. For me, the educational language was the barrier. That's what stopped me from being able to help my child. There was, again, a lot of blame, a huge disconnection between the community and the staff at the school where our children were attending. The 2 most important people in our children's lives were just not talking to each other. We were bringing our kids to the school and leaving them at the door and then picking them up, and that was the extent of our involvement. And vice versa, the school was not reaching out, so our kids were falling through the cracks. I was very lucky to be at the right place at the right time when a community organization came in our community, and we really wanted to work on healing those relationships between the community and the school. We began doing focus groups throughout Sacramento through in different communities with different schools. And we were very lucky to find an amazing, incredible group of teachers. They were leaders in the community organization that were doing a different outreach to their families. They were connecting a different way with them. So we worked with them for 2 years, and we developed a training that we provide now in. We train staff at schools and districts here in Sacramento. In 1998, we began, and we launched our very first pilot here. And it's to how do we connect with our families before something is wrong? How do we build that connection and that relationship with our families without having to bring the bad news? So this is what this group of teachers were doing. So again, in 1998, we launched here in Sacramento. By the following year, we jumped to 14 schools because the schools and our teachers just loved the outcomes they were getting from the connections that they were building with their families and their students. Today, we are in 24 different states across the country with this training that we provide for staff to go out and conduct this kind of different approach and build a relationship with their families. How it supports the whole child, it's because everything starts at home. Our parents are their child's first teacher, and every community has wildflowers, even our very low-income communities. All of our children are wildflowers. And I was listening to the importance of having adults in our children's educational life and life period. And I think that when we're connecting, again, the 2 most important people in our children's educational life, which is teachers and staff members, because honestly, for me, everybody at the school site is involved in that child's life while they're at school and they're learning. They can blossom, they can do, and they can be whatever they want. But if there's that disconnection, if there is home and school and we're not talking to each other, and everything is happening at the school, and we keep asking our teachers to teach our children without them knowing what's happening with them, what they're going to, where do they walk from school every day, where do they have to go, what is the path they take. If there's no connection between the school and the community and the home where the children are going back every day, we have students that are taking care of their little brothers and sisters, and that maybe that's why they're coming in late, and we stay in our own little box. We're never going to get the outcomes we're looking for because we're not talking to each other. So That's what we try to do with the parent-teacher home visit when we go out and we trained staff and teachers and in doing this kind of outreach, and really just sit with them and share hopes and dreams, because teachers have hopes and dreams for their students. That's why they get up and go to school. And families are struggling. Some of our families are thinking, what am I going to feed my children tomorrow? But they still want the best for their kids. They still have hopes and dreams for them. So what if we just sit together and have that conversation and then get all the resources that are happening at the school site and share with the families? Families hear it in a different way.
Thank you. And Susan?
Hi, good morning. I'm Susan Ward Roncalli, and I'm here from Los Angeles Unified School District, which is looking at the world on a slightly different scale. We have over 700,000 students. We have about 1,000 schools. I am a former classroom teacher. I was in the classroom for 30 years, and I've been doing this job as a social emotional learning facilitator for 2 years. And my job is to go out to schools. I predominantly focused on high schools throughout LA Unified, all the way from San Pedro up to the Northeast Valley. And at those schools, I work with specific teams of teachers, and those teachers have we start with looking at data. We use the school experience survey in LA Unified, and we look at the data on social emotional learning and the school climate culture data, and the school site teams look at their school's specific data. They look at it disaggregated by subgroups, and we make some specific goals for that school. So what do you want to do? How do you want to improve the outcomes for your students based on this new information? And what I'd like to share with you today is a story about a specific school, because I feel that that school's story relates to both of the research reports that you heard about this morning. So this school wanted to look specifically at social awareness and school climate culture outcomes. So what they decided to do is they wanted to find out how many of their teachers were talking to students at the beginning of each class. How many of their teachers were outside of the classroom, at the classroom door, greeting their students and asking them how they were doing. Now keep in mind, this is a high school. And in a high school, you probably remember from either teaching in one or being in one, there are fewer teachers that get up from their desk and walk out to the hallway between every period. Elementary school teachers seem to greet their students in the morning at the door, but high school teachers, not so much. But they realized that this was important, so they deployed a team of teachers, and they sort of used a checklist to see how many teachers were out there. Then they brought this information to a faculty meeting. At the same faculty meeting, they shared with their staff the research behind the importance of connecting with their students and the importance of greeting their students and asking how they were feeling. So they shared that information, and then they went back and they started to measure it once a month. So once a month, not at a predetermined time, because they wanted to get some real data, they would go between periods and find out how many teachers were actually coming out and greeting their students. And what they found is a couple of things. They found that some of the teachers were resisting coming out because they were so overwhelmed by what was going on with their students or with themselves personally. So what started to happen is this team of teachers, when they would go and ask other teachers, why aren't you coming out between periods, they started to hear the stories, and they started to see the need for more teacher-to-teacher support. So throughout the year, we kept meeting with teachers, we kept having these conversations, and what ended up happening is it became a school-wide expectation that you would stand outside your room and greet the students between periods, but the school-wide expectation came from peer-to-peer interactions. It wasn't something where an administrator came to them at a faculty meeting and said, you need to do this. In fact, all of these conversations at the faculty meetings were led by teachers, not led by the administrators. And they discovered that by reaching out to the teachers who were having difficulty getting out of the classrooms, that they built stronger connections, and this served another purpose. It was modeling for the students how the teachers were supporting each other. So the students were greeted every day, and teachers said, how are you? How are you feeling today? Students came in. Teachers would be reaching out across the hall, talking to each other and asking their colleagues, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? So it became sort of a synergistic effect. And so that was just one of the high schools that I worked with. So another high school that I worked with wanted to look at their restorative practices in a slightly different way. They still had students that were being sent out of class. So they decided that they were going to look at it in terms of implementing mindfulness practices in place of detention rooms, in place of suspension. So students had the option, they could go and just sit and do homework, or they could go and participate in a mindfulness practice. And one of the teachers was actually leading them in some yoga practices. And turned out that 90% of the students preferred to do the mindfulness yoga practice. So they then expanded mindfulness and yoga practice, and they opened up some classrooms at lunch so students can do that during the school day if they feel the need for that. So in terms of the whole child, I think one of the things that we've noticed is we're looking at the data. We're using the data to inform practice, but we're looking at the data and understanding that every single school, I worked with about 20 different high schools, and every school had a very different way of implementing positive whole child practices. So I think that's an important thing to recognize, that it's not a sort of one size fits all, that it needs to come from the school.
Great, thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I have a few questions, and then we've had wonderful questions from the audience. Thank you. We'll try to get to as many as we can, so let's try to be really succinct with these, okay? First, with Suzanne, adult learning is absolutely key to supporting the whole child. Can you just tell us quickly a little bit about how Gateway approaches adult learning?
Yeah, so anything that we want to teach our students, we try to do ourselves. We start every faculty meeting with a community circle and shout outs for one another, a little moment of appreciation for people. And then we model what's going on in our classrooms, that we want to have in the classrooms, we try to model inside the professional development. So for example, when we were doing co-teaching professional development, we used co-teaching models in the professional development. And then we definitely think about teaching the social emotional learning skills as part of our professional development. Like we are talking about, we're using the restorative practices. What does that look like? What does it sound like? How do we take scenarios and role play it so that we're ready for doing that as a behavior management intervention, as opposed to something that's more punitive and disciplinary in that way.
Okay, thank you. Yesenia, relationships aren't always sexy when it comes to education reform. They're usually not on the reformers list. But can you tell us, when relationships between students, faculty, staff, families, and parents are strong, what does that do to the learning environment of a school?
I think it changes everything. But first of all, it motivates the child. It motivates the child to get up in the morning and want to go to school because they don't want to let down their teacher or their family, and they know that they can always talk to each other because there is a relationship now. It motivates them to want to first attend school, to ask more questions, to feel safe, because there is more than one adult that is there to support them and to take care of them. And knowing that, again, I keep saying the two most important people in their life, in the educational life, are working together, are talking together, are in communication with each other. It just, they just feel more supported all around, and they just learn because they know that they have the support of these two important adults in their life.
Yeah. Thank you. Susan, you're at a very large school district. What shifts are you seeing in practice in schools throughout Los Angeles to better support the whole child?
Well, the shifts happen at the central office, our wonderful Beaudry building, but those shifts are spreading throughout the district, and one of the major shifts is to look at social emotional learning in the context of other aspects of the work. So we work collaboratively with the people from school mental health and with the people who run what's called the Academic English Mastery Program. So a lot of the professional development that we've been doing that is causing this shift is something that we're calling SEL squared, which is social emotional learning, standard English learning. And the professional development starts with talking about trauma, and we go into the biology and the epigenetics, and we go into cultural trauma, and that we pose as the why this work is important. And then our how to respond to the work is a combination of teaching about culturally and linguistically proficient pedagogy and how to incorporate social emotional learning into practice for teachers. So having the synergy of the three offices working together is really making a difference district-wide.
Yeah, thank you. Channa, you're the SEL director in your school district. How do you keep this work from becoming siloed or another thing teachers and schools have to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is similar to Susan in terms of really breaking down those barriers between departments. I think in district offices, there's a tendency to keep people separate, and our superintendent has made it very clear that we work together. And so really collaborating with curriculum and instruction, collaborating with special education, attendance, and due process, so that we're not thinking about these challenges and potential barriers and needs of students in isolation, but thinking about how to integrate that all together. I think a big part of, since we're so early in this effort in our district, a big part of my job is, thinking about how to build capacity and really help teachers and leaders understand what social emotional learning is and how it looks and how it can be integrated into the academic curriculum. So it doesn't do exactly what you asked. It doesn't become an add-on, but it is the facilitator of learning. Learning is a social process. It requires engagement and emotions. It requires you to collaborate and communicate with the people around you in order to learn deeply and for it to be meaningful. And if we're not doing that and modeling it, like Suzanne talked about also, if we're not doing that as the leaders in the district, then it's a moot point. So I think that's a really important piece of it.
Okay, and last question for Brent. Big softball question for you. How does the state best support this work of educating and developing the whole child?
I'm really fortunate to work with the social emotional learning state team, which started about 2 years ago. I lead that with Jennifer Peck, who's also here, and Channa and Susan are also on the state team. And I think probably what we've found is that be a good listener. I think that's really important. I can remember when the guiding principles, when we were getting feedback on those, Superintendent Gordon gave me the opportunity to present them to our 13 district superintendents. And I can remember we got some great feedback, some things to change, but at the end he said, this is the sort of thing, we're a small district, this is the sort of thing that we don't have the capacity to build on our own, but it gives us a great place to start in our own context to do this work. And we just continued to listen. We have a compendium of resources that will be aligned to the guiding principles that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And that was just listening to the field, listening to teachers, listening to principals, listening to superintendents about what it is that they need on a daily basis. And so that compendium of resources is really speaking to that. But I guess my advice would be just listen to the people that are out doing the work in the field.
Okay. Thank you. We have lots of great questions here, and I would encourage those of you who have asked questions that we don't get to, use that networking lunch to come up to one of us, please. This one's actually for Yesenia. Do you provide training for parents as well?
No, we just provide the training for the teachers.
Okay. There's a question on trauma. And what does it mean for all educators to be trauma-informed? Anyone?
So I think looking at, when I started trauma-informed professional development, I start with a story of an individual student, and that story will sort of open the hearts of the people who are in the room. Then I try to go over the biology behind trauma. We talk a lot about near science, so the neurobiology, the epigenetics, the ACEs, and then we spend the most time that we can talking about resiliency and how to build resiliency.
Last one. What can parents do to advocate for and support whole child education? Anyone?
I think parents are very hungry for information, and I think they have the tools to be able to support their children's and their education. They just don't know how. And if we step out of our comfort zone and really help them understand, parents are really, really wanting to be involved in their educations. I just think the barrier is the lack of education and also the intimidation of, you're an institution, I'm just a parent on the other side. And once we break that wall down, the magic happens.
Okay, great. So we're going to close up now. I want you to please give a hand to our panelists. Remind you to please grab one of them or me during the break and ask some of the questions. Some of them will be for the policy part. We'll be raffling off copies of Wildflowers that have been signed. And there are more that you can find on Amazon. And all proceeds, by the way, go to support whole child education. I just want to leave you with 5 things to think about this work. Number 1, commit to it, right? Start someplace. It can be with making your playgrounds accessible. It could be changing the way we greet our parents and students every day as they come to school. It could be rethinking the way we look at food and the food that we serve our children. Think structurally as well as systemically, and know that one change could have adverse impacts. So be able to think holistically as you approach this work. Remember the voice of the student and teachers. And if you put those voices first and build around them, you'll see success in all ways. We have to get rid of the ideology. The my way versus your way. I win, you lose. The either ors. If we're going to do this work, and as I said, it's hard and it's costs, but it's sacred and critical, we have to do it together. Let's look for the both ands. And finally, no matter where you are in the system, whether you're a policymaker here in Sacramento, or a teacher in a classroom, or a parent, or even a student on student council, take the opportunity to lead, because those of us who are in positions, the adults that are helping to set the conditions, if we're in a position to change, we must make change. Thank you. And again, thanks to our panelists.